So at a point in time when questions are allowed, anyone that wants to ask a question, because it is an official public meeting, needs to identify themselves and provide their address. So thank you.
Thank you, your worship, and good evening to yourself, counselors, staff, and members of the public here tonight. As Mayor Bev said, I am Jordan Folkens. I'm a planning consultant out of BM Ross and Associates. I've been retained by the County of Lambton to assist the planning department with the review of this application. So Jared is here with me. He is a planner for the County of Lambton. We co-authored the report that went to council. And we will present basically a background on this proposal, some of the planning considerations, the planning process, where we are in this stage, and our recommendation. And we're here, of course, if there are any questions that council has. Now, we do have a PowerPoint presentation, which I believe is going to be on the screen or on the wall. Perfect. As the mayor said, this is official plan amendment number 5, and it is for the property municipally known as 200 and 206 Exmouth Street, and it's to allow mixed use development on the land. I will give, like I said, a brief overview of the application. Jared will give some background, some context to the site, and describe the surrounding area around this site. I will get into the proposed development, like I said, some of the planning considerations. Some of the information that was submitted and what it means and relates to this application. I will give an overview of the planning process, where we are in the land development process, and some of the planning considerations, and Jared will finish up the presentation with the correspondence that was received for this application and some of the next steps required.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm Jared Preston. I'm the planner for the County of Lambton. I provide planning services to the village of Port Edward. I'm just going to go over some characteristics of the subject lands. These subject lands are known as 200 and 206 Exmouth Street. And they're located on the north side of Exmouth, west of Christina Street North. There is frontage on 206 Exmouth Street, of which is approximately 204 meters of frontage. And about 225 meters of frontage 204 meters of frontage along Christina and 225 meters of frontage around Exmouth Street. An area of approximately 6.4 hectares on the former Homes Foundry site. 206 Exmouth Street, which is the old Esso gas station, located in the southeast corner by North Perry Park on Christina and Exmouth Street. On that property, there was about 35.9 meters of frontage along Christina and 38.2 meters of frontage along Exmouth Street. Now, in the Point Edward official plan, the lands are currently designated as special tourist commercial. Now, this designation permits a range of commercial uses and some mixed use residential uses. In the Point Edward zoning bylaw, the lands are also zoned as commercial 2.2 with a holding zone. This zone allows a range of commercial uses after the holding zone is removed. So I'm just going to go into also a little more detail about the surrounding area. So the subject lands are adjacent to Provincial Highway 402 to the north. There's further commercial uses to the west of the property and residential uses to the south and North Perry Park, as you can see on the map to the east. The site is adjacent to a strategic growth area that is located along Exmouth Street with commercial businesses. And there's also businesses that have 3 to 6 story buildings as well. And there's also other examples of mixed use buildings in the area as well along Water Street.
Thank you, Jared. With this application, the applicant submitted some great visuals. If you came here early, you'd be able to see some of these on the poster boards or on the screen in front of you right now. So this helps staff, planning staff, council understand exactly what's being proposed here today. Gives an idea of how the old Holmes Foundry site could be developed. If you look at the screen or on the poster boards, you'll see what's being proposed is a mixed-use development. Together, what's being proposed is around 1,900 dwelling units. Now, this would be in the form of townhouses, which are proposed in the center of the site, as well as mid-rise and high-rise buildings. So when you look at the applicant's proposal, they intend to have higher density uses located along the 402 in order to buffer the development from the remaining parcel. Along the south section of the site, it's proposed to have a more active streetscape, have more retail uses, a pedestrian environment, where people can actually walk and bike. If you just look at the image on the right, this is in the form of a number of mid-rise and low-rise and high-rise buildings. Switch to the next slide. What you're looking at here is what's proposed at grade. These are the proposed ground floor uses, again, conceptually on how the area could be developed. And as I mentioned, what's being proposed on the concept are retail uses located along the Exmouth Street frontage of the property. And even in the other residential buildings and the hotel building, the applicant has indicated a desire to have front doors facing landscaped areas and that sort of thing as well. And finally, to a helpful rendering exactly what could be developed on the site. There are different colors on there. The purple is proposed to be a hotel building, and that'd be on the top 10 stories, I believe, of a 30-story building at the northwest section of the site. Beside that would be a seniors housing facility or a care facility. But you can see exactly, like I said, the higher density, the higher buildings are proposed along Highway 402, provide that buffer, as well as in the southeast and the northeast sections of the site. Which brings us to today. The applicant has proposed to change the official plan to allow for this sort of development to take place. Now, as Jared mentioned, the site is already designated a special tourist commercial. So that allows a wide range of commercial uses. It also allows residential uses on the property. What's really proposed here today is to expand that, to provide flexibility for the commercial use that could be on the property, as well as to allow specific residential uses in the form of townhouses, apartments, and seniors housing facilities. Now, with that, the applicant has proposed what's called a site-specific. So if it doesn't fit a designation, they would have to apply for amendment to provide policies that would allow that to take place. In this case, when they're changing the designation to mixed use, that designation has maximum density requirements. So to get around that, they have proposed no maximum residential densities and no maximum commercial floor areas. And I'll get into our recommendation a little bit, exactly how we feel that should be treated. Again, summarizing the uses that are permitted. This is found on the applicant's board as well as in their previous presentation. We took a look at that as well to compare exactly what is allowed in the official plan today and really what's being proposed here. So when you take a look at it, a lot of the uses are allowed under the existing policies, either as of right as a standalone use or as part of a mixed use development. So in the form of residential uses and office uses, they are allowed, but only as part of a mixed use development. And the areas that have an X beside them would be self-storage uses, places of amusement and recreation, warehouses, and private commercial recreation facilities. Now, those are allowed in the highway commercial or the mixed commercial industrial areas of the city. And again, to open up, provide the flexibility for future development of the property, the applicant has added or asked to allow those as well. So with this application, the applicant submitted a planning justification report. Taylor is a planner from Lincoln Primo. She's here today. She'll be able to answer any questions specific to the development. They also provide the conceptual plans that you can see beside you here today, as well as what we had in the presentation. There is a service and brief that was prepared by MTE Consultants. What they do is they look at the capacity, they look exactly what sort of infrastructure is in place to allow for this development at a very high level. Now, To get into the servicing brief, there are some capacity issues, specifically with the sanitary system. I believe Forest Main Pump Station and the wastewater treatment plant, there are some capacity concerns, which we'll get into in a little bit. But again, this application is high level and there are mechanisms in place to require those systems to be upgraded before any development proceeds. There's also a summary of the environmental site assessments, and there's also boards here. If you walk by the site, you'll see all the boreholes or all the little blue stands sticking up. There's ongoing soil studies being done right now to make sure that the site is clean if it does get developed for residential purposes. And finally, there was a transportation impact study prepared by Paradigm Transportation. And everything is very high level at this moment. They have recommended that there be some improvements made to Exmouth Street, and further study would be done in the later stages of this development process. So while we're talking about planning process, this is essentially step one of the process. At this point, you establish the high level policy framework. You say what this property can be used for, and the actual specifics or the details of the development will be done at a future process. That's called the zoning bylaw amendment stage. At that point, there'll be established height requirements, there'll be lot coverage requirements. That's when you get into parking and setbacks. How far back do you have to be from the property line, as well as landscaping? So that will be done at a later process if council does approve this tonight. As I said before, and as Jared mentioned earlier, there is a hold on the property. That means the property cannot be developed until servicing is in place, specifically for sanitary servicing. There will also be, once all those processes are finalized, site plan control. That's when detailed plans are provided to the village and they'll review it in terms of infrastructure, landscaping, sidewalks, local buildings, and that sort of thing will be another process. And then finally, after all that is done, there will be a building permit. So that's where building staff from the County of Lambton will review the permits and make sure that it complies with the building code. Thank you. And as part of this application, as I said, it's to implement high-level policies. There are a number of considerations that council has to have tonight, and it starts from the province now. So any sort of amendment to the village official plan needs to be consistent with provincial policy. And we'll get into some of the relevant policies that should be considered in our opinion. Aside from that, there's also Lambton County plan, which has some regional policies that need to be considered. And finally, needs to meet the intent of the village's official plan as well. So what are some of these planning considerations? The provincial planning statement was recently updated in 2024. And some of the relevant policies that we found is it's encouraged to have what's called a complete community. You want to create an atmosphere where people can live, work, play. I'm sure some of you have heard that before. And what's being proposed today would open up a range of commercial, recreational, open space uses where people can work, they can play, and they can live. Also, residential intensification. So developing a site with densities that are higher than what currently exist. In planning terms, this is an efficient use of the land and city infrastructure, and that's what's being taken, or that's what's being proposed here today. Which leads me into a strategic growth area. The province has mentioned that municipalities can identify different areas of the city where they want to see growth. So this means, and it's specifically mentioned in the PPS, is areas that are brownfield sites, sites that could be contaminated that are going to be cleaned up. Areas that are near transit, that have sidewalks and multi-use trails near them, places that are near commercial areas and major roads. These are the areas where the province wants to see growth take place. And a range of housing options. Again, the diversity and amount of housing options is encouraged. And in this application, it would, although residential uses are already allowed, it would specifically allow townhouses, seniors housing, and apartment buildings. Which leads me to the County of Lambton official plan. From a regional perspective, Sarnia and Point Edward are what's considered an urban center. That's where the county sees the majority of growth. And the reason behind that is that's where the majority of the infrastructure is. That's where the services are. That's where people can actually walk and bike and get to different parkland, commercial areas and whatnot. Also, in the official plan is to encourage a well-designed built form that is well-designed and creates a sense of place. Again, this is pretty high level at this moment. As I said, there are a lot of other applications that will have to be submitted, and that will be further reviewed by staff. And finally, it's encouraged to permit higher densities and new development. Again, that gets into the efficient use of land and services. Which brings us to the village of Point Edward. We've mentioned a few times exactly what the designation is. It's a special tourist commercial. It allows for mixed use development already. So what's being proposed is essentially, I call it to change the color on a map. It's supposed to, or it's proposed to be going to a mixed use. Now, when you do that, you remove some relevant policies that could be important. And in this case, there are policies that talk about the importance of the site as it being a key gateway, an entrance to the county, the country, the village. And with that, stresses an importance in urban design. So we felt reviewing that those policies should be moved into this application and should not be lost. Furthermore, as I mentioned, originally the proposal was to have no maximum densities for residential development. Now, we had concerns with that, especially when a new zoning bylaw amendment comes forward. There are policies in the village's official plan that we feel need to be considered, and they deal with high density residential development. So while we are okay with a certain degree of residential intensification, there are maximums. There are things to consider down the road, such as shadowing or density impacting people's privacy and that sort of thing. So there are a number of studies that will need to be considered, and we want to make sure the policies were in place to make sure that happens. So in summary, we feel that this is a efficient use of land. It is a brownfield site. There are a number of policies that do encourage this sort of development. It would create the opportunity for this site to be a walkable community, as you can see on the boards. There's areas for people to work, for people to shop, people to live, and park space for people to play. And it would also create a good buffer from the highway, especially for the lower density townhouses that are proposed. Now, as I said, there are some future considerations. This is really just step one in a multi-step process. At the time of a zoning bylaw amendment, there would be additional studies required. And this would be not limited to, but deal with certain things like wind. As I said, shadow studies, see if there's any sort of impact on adjacent residential areas. There's noise and acoustic studies that would be required, which would have recommendations for the units facing Highway 402. And there'd be updated studies to the traffic as well as the servicing studies. And finally, we've reviewed what's being proposed, and we do support the change of land use designation to a mixed use designation, which would allow for a range of commercial and residential uses on the site with several site-specific policies. Now, this includes a density policy that would say that the density will be incorporated into a future zoning bylaw, and that certain policies for high-rise development are reviewed as part of that application. Similarly, we have recommended that commercial floor areas also have no maximum, but be further reviewed and implemented in a zoning bylaw, as well as give consideration to the same high-rise development policies. We also want to ensure that there is a pedestrian-friendly frontage along Exmouth Street. And the policies encourage active commercial uses, retails, restaurants, sidewalks, having street frontages that are not dominated by blank frontages, parking structures, parking areas, and that sort of thing. And finally, like I said, to carry over existing policies that recognize this site as a key gateway into the community and require a high quality of urban and building design. One other thing I'd like to mention is I did not talk too much about the retail warehouses and self-storage buildings that are proposed. I do recognize that the applicant wants complete flexibility in this sort of development. However, what's being proposed in the plans is not necessarily what could take place on this site. Now, having said that, we have concerns with retail warehouses. We feel that they're more industrial in nature. They could lead to use or activities during the night, which could impact the future sensitive land uses on the area. They are large buildings. They have large trucks that operate. And for those reasons, we really don't feel it's the best use of the site and we cannot support. So the draft bylaw in front of council, we do not have that. Council, having said that, is well within their rights to add that as a permitted use if they wish to. Now, I'd also like to add that retail uses are permitted. It's really when you get that next step to a retail warehouse and you're catering more to not the public is where we have concerns. Also, the mini storage warehousing we cannot support. We feel that it would not have a positive impact on the streetscape and again, not efficient use of land. Now, having said that, accessory buildings are self-storage that are catered to the residential uses and are screened from view. We do not have any concerns. It'd be a standalone building used for mini storage purposes. So with that, I'll get Jared to finish things up and talk about next steps, as well as some of the correspondence we have received.
So, thank you, Jordan. So a couple months ago, there was a virtual open house that was presented by the applicant. There was generally strong support for the proposed development out of this virtual meeting. After the virtual open house, we received some written correspondence, first from Lambton Public Health. They provided comments based on this proposed future development. And there were some traffic-related air pollution issues that they had brought up first, as well as recommendations for green energy options for this development. There were also concerns on increased active travel, measures for recreational spaces, and healthy food systems. Lambton Public Health supported the mixed-use development, but did have some issues with the concept of drive-through restaurants being permitted on the site. Please note that this type of use is currently permitted in the special tourist commercial designation per the Village of Point Edward official plan. There is also correspondence received from Lambton County Building Services. They asked for more detailed information related to fire access and protection. These details are typically included later in the planning process. Lambton Public Works also provided comments on a traffic impact study that was a required study of this application. Also, the Ministry of Transportation also brought comments. We received comments based on the traffic impact study from them as well. So as Jordan has stated in this presentation, this is a very high level application. It's the first step in this planning process. So there will be a number of future applications we'll have to go through before we hit the building permit stage. If this official plan amendment application is approved by Village Council, the next step would be, it would be sent to the County of Lambton for approval. And then if the County of Lambton approves this application, it goes to a zoning bylaw amendment stage. So that would be required to change the zoning and also to remove the holding zone on the property. If the zoning bylaw amendment is approved and the holding zone is removed, it then goes to site plan control. So we got various steps, 3 or 4 steps to go through before a building permit can be considered. Additional approvals are also required from provincial ministries and the city of Sarnia as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jared. I just want to note that we're here if the council does have any questions. Just note that the applicant and some of their consultants are also here if there's more detailed questions about the studies that were submitted. So thank you.
So thank you both for your presentation. I'm going to ask my council if they have any questions before we go to the next speaker. So start. Okay, okay.
I just want to seek clarification. You were quite clear, but I want to clarify that with the warehousing and self-storage, if we approve the bylaw as it is today, the developer would be able to allow places within a building for people to store their stuff if they're in a small unit. And with the warehousing, like retail units could have stock rooms, if you will, to warehouse their stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, through your worship to the counselor, if I can just touch on that a little bit. Retail is currently permitted. It would be allowed to be permitted. That's small scale, that's large scale. Retail warehouses that are the much larger structures that have the capabilities to not serving the public, but to ship it to other suppliers and whatnot. That sort of larger scale development is something that we cannot support. Council still has the ability to approve that tonight if they want to. However, they would have to add that to the draft bylaw. In terms of mini storage, again, as a standalone use, mini storage along Exmo Street, Christina Street, we cannot support. Having said that, accessory buildings for apartment buildings or mixed-use buildings would be permitted, accessory buildings in the current zoning bylaw. That permission would remain.
And as a follow-up on that, if down the road the developer changes direction and doesn't go with this mixed-use development and wants to put in a big warehouse, how would they proceed to get to that?
Through your worship, again to the counselor, it really depends on what council wants to do tonight.
Okay.
If they approve the amendment as drafted by Jared and myself, they would have to then reapply for an official plan amendment and go through the rezoning process. If they do approve it, they don't have to do that. If you guys do not approve that, then they have to go through that process again.
Okay. And then final question relates to your question about private recreation not being permitted. What's included in that area?
Again, through Madam Chair to the counselor, we really with the mini storage warehouse. The retail warehouse and the mini storage buildings. I would have to again look at the reports, see exactly what places of amusement where they're allowed, and maybe Jared knows off the top of the study. If not, it's something we could definitely look into and provide that. to-
Places of amusement and recreation, and I know it's in the present OPA, I'm just. But there's no further definition, so.
And through the chair, I just reiterate, again, everything that was proposed, aside from mini storage. And retail warehousing was included in the amendment. We can go back into our notes and try to provide you with another answer, or the applicant is here and they may be able to speak to that as well.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Taylor Whitney, who works for the developer. She's applying for the applicant, and Taylor is going to do a presentation on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, members of council, staff, and members of the public. My name is Taylor Whitney. I'm a planner with Zelenka Preamble Limited, the planning consultants representing the landowner of 200 to 206 Expo Street, otherwise known as the former Holmes Foundry lands. Here with me today is Tyler from South Coast Developments Incorporated, Riaz with S2S Environmental, and Haram from BDP Quadrangle, and we make up a portion of the development team. I would like to first take an opportunity to thank staff for their hard work on this project to date. This application has been several years in the making, so we're very pleased to be here today. We have had the opportunity to review the staff report and proposed bylaw, and we appreciate staff's recommendation for approval of this OPA. Jordan and Jared have provided an excellent overview of the proposed development, so to avoid repeating myself, I'll just use my time to jump right into the recommendation. We are satisfied with the majority of the recommendation, but we do respectfully disagree with the exclusion of self-storage facilities and retail warehousing. And I'd like to use my time to address this. The development proposal represents the highest and best use on the lands, and it really is the ideal development scenario. But there are a number of factors and constraints that come into play with the development of this scale, including infrastructure limitations that's been noted by staff. There are significant infrastructure improvements that are required to accommodate a development of this scale. And while we do have a number of options available to address these limitations, and we're exploring all of them and are optimistic that we can come to a solution, it is our intent to implement the maximum amount of flexibility on these lands, should these or other constraints be limiting. Our ultimate goal is to clean up the site and develop it efficiently, allowing it to be used for the first time in over 30 years. Aside from the potential constraints, it's also our opinion that retail warehousing and self-storage facilities do not detract from the community. Rather, they can complement it by providing valuable services that support both residential and commercial uses. We also disagree that retail warehousing and self-storage are inherently industrial uses. The definition of retail warehousing in the zoning bylaw includes sales to the public, and it's only found in commercial zones. Integrating these uses into mixed-use developments, particularly self-storage, is practical, and it addresses needs that are often overlooked in high-density development. Because higher density development is generally smaller, more affordable housing units, they also lack sufficient storage space. Given the growing demand for this type of housing, providing practical amenities like self-storage in residential development is valuable and helps overcome this limitation. When designed thoughtfully, self-storage and warehousing can be incorporated in a pleasing way that is complementary to existing and future development. It's important to note that the official plan, as well as this site-specific amendment in front of you, contains policies to address land use compatibility and urban design, which the applicant will still be required to adhere to in future development proposals. A zoning bylaw amendment and site plan approval will be required, so staff and council both will have ample opportunity to provide their input on how these uses can be implemented appropriately in a manner that is still consistent with the official plan and compatible with the existing neighborhood. Since the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate compatibility, and these uses cannot be developed as of right, without a zoning bylaw amendment, there is little risk to the municipality in allowing these uses. We hope that this council sees the value in providing the maximum amount of flexibility on these lands, and we respectfully request that self-storage and retail warehousing be included as permitted uses. Our team is here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm going to ask my council now if there are any questions of Taylor. Start at the end. You. Thank you, go.
Thank you, Taylor, for explaining why you want those included. My question relates back to the letter from Lambton Public Health, where they had concerns about the residential being so close to the 402. And they offered suggestions about mitigating air pollution and noise pollution. If you go the residential route, would you entertain those suggestions? And do you have examples of where you've incorporated those barriers in other projects that are close to the highway?
Sure, I don't personally have specific examples, but their considerations were appropriate and they would absolutely be considered in future development. And it's anticipated that there are a lot more studies that are going to be required before any residential can be built on this site. Noise, air pollution, wind, shadows, we anticipate that the municipality will ask for all of those studies.
Thank you.
Hi, you mentioned that the retail warehousing could be a complement to the community. Are you able to provide any specific examples of what that look like?
I think it's possible that a retail warehouse in this instance could look like the ground floor of a large high-rise residential building. It certainly is designed that way in other municipalities and other cities in both Ontario and in Canada. I think it's reasonable that it could be incorporated that way.
Question. On the self-storage building, you're thinking single story, multiple story?
I think it will largely depend on how we can continue laying out the site. The issue that we foresee with only allowing it as an accessory use is that accessory buildings are generally related to single attached dwellings that have yards. That's generally what we think of when we think of an accessory building. But we're talking about townhouses or apartments. What are those accessory buildings? What do they look like in high density residential development? And what we would be looking to do is kind of push the envelope to come up with something a little bit different that could be compatible in this type of setting.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I have a follow-up. If we don't approve the warehousing or self-storage as part of this amendment, how does that affect you moving forward?
Well, we have a couple of options. We can proceed with the recommendation from council, or we can go back to the drawing board and come back with an ulterior proposal.
And then just to clarify to Mayor and maybe to Jordan or Chair, Taylor spoke about a retail warehouse could be the ground floor of a high rise. You alluded to the fact that that would be permitted use and a mixed use relative as part of that building. Same with the self-storage. If self-storage is at the back of a high rise and people are allowed to store their stuff in that, is that permitted the way you presented the bylaw to us?
Through the chair, can everybody hear me back there? You want me to stay in the- Good. Certainly there are mechanisms you put into this. For example, if you want to allow a retail warehouse, we specify a retail warehouse as part of a mixed use development. Add that. In terms of mini storage, our primary concern was that it would dominate the streetscape. We looked at the property that really all we saw. Now, if it was buffered or hidden or screened or placed at the back of the site, I think we would be okay getting very as well. But I personally would be okay with adding storage, that certain provisions were in place, the policy in place that deal with screening, And we look at that for your second together.
So comment. So again, that goes back to the question I asked you earlier, that when we get to the zoning bylaw, we would have the opportunity to define that, to say the storage will be, you know, certain way, that it doesn't impact the location. So that can happen during the zoning.
That is correct. My concern is allowing the storage at the rate that there is a government policy. Potentially worst case scenario, it opens up to issues with bylaw approved with exactly what I checked. You tell me by truth, Taylor did mention that there are additional policies that could provide protection from that. But we are not comfortable with just allowing that out of the rate of this year.
That's one more. So, through you, Taylor, hearing Jordan and Jared's explanation of the warehousing and storage, will that allow you to move forward?
I certainly think that it's reasonable to want to put in mechanisms of buffering and screening and making sure that the public realm is vibrant and protected. It's a common urban design that I would see that in municipalities as well.
Okay, there's no more questions in council. Just as a reminder, we're going to offer the public a chance to ask questions. The microphone is up here. You need to provide your name and your address, please. And your question has to be, or we're asking you to be under 5 minutes. Okay, Mr. Bird. Oh,
Good evening, Warren Lurie, and I live at 106 Albert Street in the village of Point Everett. First off, I'd like to thank council for giving us this opportunity to address any concerns that you might have. My first one is through your worship to Jared. You mentioned that you'd been in contact with the MTO, or that you're going to be in contact with the MTO as far as building, or how it's going to affect their on-ramp. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I'll address that question. The MTO was circulated. Any major applications, especially one right next to a corridor, they're circulated. Now, the traffic consultants have been involved for at least a year, I believe, and instead of me, correct me if I'm wrong. What they do is they develop in terms of a scope, exactly what they want to see in that study. And they haven't identified any concerns right now. There will be further studies once details of exactly what they want to do are known. Aside from that, they'll be able to comment on the traffic study that gets submitted. They also need to get land use approvals from the Ministry of Transportation. They need to get sign off directly from them as well.
As the mayor has alluded to, my time's limited, so my concern was then through the council, we have a water problem at the bottom of the on-ramp. You may have seen it when it's frozen over. I don't know if that's an MTO thing, but it's something that perhaps you could take into consideration as far as drainage off the property. We don't need any more water at the bottom of the on-ramp. Also, this is to Taylor. You talked about warehousing, retail warehousing. When I think of retail warehousing, I think of 18-wheelers and big trucks bringing in material. Your plans showing nice, condos and that. I'm not going to want transport truck coming in at 11 o'clock at night, or even during the day if I've got children playing around that area. I'm wondering if that's something that you could take into consideration, and also council when you make your decision. What size of retail warehousing you're planning? Like, are we planning an Amazon warehouse, or you know what I mean? Okay. And the other one was a definition of what's campus care. Through worship to the planners.
Through the chair, I'll touch on a couple of those. For the MTO, let me just go back to that for a second. I forgot to mention that there will be a stormwater management plan that needs to be approved by them as well, as part of their land use approval system. And stormwater management will be reviewed by staff, well, once it gets to that site plan stage. In terms of campus care, that's what's shown on the boards and all those fancy materials. What's being proposed is more of a seniors housing facility in terms of, what's going to go in the official plan, so. If
Place for
we,
me to live.
seniors housing facility and any sort of accessory uses to that, if they.
Thank you. Thank you, council.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Glenn. I am on the west side of North Perry Park. It's 316 X1. My biggest concern is when we have problems with the 402, if there's accidents, they reroute so many trucks onto X1. Now with all these buildings going up, and you're talking about your retail and the storage, if it's for the residential, a lot of the apartments, I lived in Windsor, I lived in London, and often residential will give them their own walk-in place in their apartment, which is usually close to an outside wall, so it buffers noise. Plus, they don't have to worry about people breaking in and that kind of thing. Retail, that's a whole nother issue. I haven't heard anything about alcohol stores, or I'm praying that isn't gonna be something there, because there's plenty of alcohol all around here. The other thing is, because of all the traffic, I have a hard time getting out of my driveway now. I can't even imagine when I need to get, I not only have I have 4 streets I have to stare and watch, and now I've got this, I'm like, if you wanna put a traffic light in front of my house, I would appreciate it, because maybe I'll get out. And that's, the other thing is, if you have that many people, we only have Metro within the vicinity, we're gonna have everybody, and I'm calculating probably 2,000 people that are gonna be in these facilities. They gotta go to Metro, they gotta go somewhere, so again, everybody's on Exmo back and forth. So I just want everybody to consider that stuff, and that's very important to me, otherwise I will have to move, I can't. Don't want to, I love this area, I love Queen Edward, I love this place. And I don't wanna have to move again, but you guys might force me.
I'll make a comment about the grocery store. I might be speaking out of turn, but it's been brought up before by the developer. Potentially, if this is a campus of care and we have the long-term care housing in the middle, one of the ideas would be a boutique grocery store. So a boutique grocery store is a store, say, in London, the Green,
Somewhere.
well, there's a better one, and anyway, the one in London has all kinds of prepared food. Farm Boy, thank you very much. So they would put in something like a Farm Boy that is accessible to people living there who may not want to go and buy groceries and do their own cooking. It's just to supplement the lifestyle.
How about to Sonia? I've lived in huge cities in my life and I came from Mississauga. I live on Nelson Street on the corner of one, there's a lovely park. What I found in the 3 years that I've lived here, that this is an isolated island, and when I hear storage and all that, I'm saying, what? There's storage all the way down on Fun Street till I get to the park. I'm in my age where I don't walk 3 miles a day, but if I like to walk, I want to go. If I have to go to the bank, I have to go all the way to the mall because the nearest one is on Exmont, but my church is this way. So the whole thing doesn't flow because of the highway and the east and west dividing of the city. The city has a pattern where things seem to go down. and Northgate was the closest to me. So anything I want, I have to get in the car and get there. And I miss most of all places where you go to eat, where you can, as a senior. I don't want dinners or that, but just recently I found a restaurant in Point Edward, the bridge, and it's one of the things that I'm familiar with. I wish there would be more places like it. But when I hear storage, there's storage right across from Sintara. There's storage on the side. It's isolating. If I want to walk, even at night, would I walk in areas where there's no traffic? No. I would really like to see a little more of the commercial, small commercial, restaurants or the grocery stores, doesn't matter. Like you said, a grocery store in an apartment building where you go and have what the Italian call a hot table, you buy what you want, and that's wonderful for seniors. My building is 50% seniors. And I know I share my food because the grocery stores sell portions that are too big. So all of these things I think would be a consideration for the future. And I didn't know that Point Edward is different than Sarnia. So I'm living on that. I was thinking I lived in Sarnia. No, but I do like Point Edward. And it is wonderful to go to the river and watch the lake. But I cannot walk there even if I want to. So I would hope that you would consider to build something more alive as the city is expanding. And I meet many people from out of town and say, what's going on? This is a traffic, just people coming across the bridge. But even people coming across the bridge, where can they go and eat? Where do we invite them? I think I like to have you consider that for the future. It has to grow.
Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you, appreciate it. Next.
Good evening, I'm Larry McKenzie, 715 Alexander Avenue, Cornell. My question is through the planner. You mentioned something about before the holding zone could be lifted, the servicing the roads had to be in. Is that for the whole project?
Through the chair, I'll address that, and if Jared has his zoning bylaw, you can read exactly what it says, so I'm paraphrasing. It doesn't have to be in place, but agreements do have to be in place that demonstrate that there is capacity to allow for that development. So once you've demonstrated through the agreements and all that sort of thing, then the applicant would apply to council and they would decide whether or not it's appropriate to lift that.
And if that's the case, would the developer be the only one paying for that, or is it something that would be joint?
Get through the chair, the details exactly who's responsible for all that would be dealt with in a future application, or sorry, future consideration. Council can decide all kinds of different infrastructure improvements that they want to do. There are other mechanisms in place for maybe the developer to pay for things, but those details would have to be yet as a.
Thanks, sir. Anybody, anything further before we close off the questions? With the applicant or consultant, anything you'd like to speak to, against any of the comments that were made? Covered it, thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes,
My name is Drew Russell, I live at 27 River Street, just a question, this whole infrastructure, recently fire department. We only have one police officer right now for the village. Most of the amount of people come in, it's still the development community. It's not people are gonna have to take another look at that. We're also gonna look at the fire department, have to take a look at that. And we're also gonna have to look at our infrastructure stuff we have currently, noise issues, there's a lot of issues we have to look at. Who's gonna pay for all this?
That's one thing we don't look at as well, that's a concern we should look at as well as residents. You know, with our taxes are a lot now, it's just, I see it going. I see. We certainly don't have the infrastructure or the support anything, especially for sewage and water, hydro, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still got another thing that's probably coming in the future as well. So it's just a goal. And I also do have a concern about warehousing. My concern is that we have a lot of trucks in this area right now, and you can see that they're not, highway trucks that back up all the time. We talked about the pushing there, having metals and stuff like that within trucks. If we start allowing warehousing in this area, we'll also see more trucks, more idle vehicles, more noise pollution. Just general congestion, and I can just see that not good. That's all, it's just a comment.
Thanks very much, for your thoughts, and all of this is, trust me, being discussed in the background. There's, as laid out, there's a lot of work yet to be done. So. Okay, I'll write it down, is there, I'm going to declare the public meeting portion closed. So, and
Council, Dan Cadu, 201 Louis Street, Point Edward. Just to be clear, if you turn down the warehouse storage and the self-storage, does that mean that the development will have to go back and give you a new proposal, or if you say yes tonight, we can still cancel the self-storage and warehouse development? Because I mean, I don't think I'd want my Kendall Street is a fine example. It's a good spot between Front Street and Canada, that works, but if you move that one street over, I don't think I'd be very happy. So I'm not sure if you say yes tonight, if you move ahead with that, or if you say no tonight, you have to bring a proposal.
again, I think that there's.
I'm
Okay.
not sure where that's.
Sure, I'll let you answer it, because I think there's a misconception.
Certainly, through the chair, council has a number of options in front of them tonight. They could vote to approve the submission as we have recommended, which would not include retail warehouse or mini storage. If that's the way that it goes tonight, the applicant has the opportunity to appeal that decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal, or they can accept that that's not included. And as we mentioned, there are a wide variety or wide range of commercial uses that would be allowed. So maybe that's not an important consideration for their development. Or they could accept it and reapply, do this whole process to get that elite.
So turn it down, they reapply or appeal. Understand? If you say go ahead, then move forward with the proposal.
No, as we said, the next step is the zoning bylaw amendment. That's where you get into control exactly what does this storage look like? What does this warehouse look like? Not acceptable or acceptable,
I think
right?
the main concern here is we don't want transport to come in.
Right.
All hours of the night, or,
Right.
you know, if you have a car, you want people self-storage in the middle of the drum.
No,
We just gotta watch.
Yeah, no, exactly.
My understanding is that if we approve the way it is tonight, they can have self-storage units attached to or within the apartment buildings on the ground floor, let's say, for those residents to store stuff. And
Is that considered a garage or?
yeah, like it'd be at the back of the building, something like that, where people can store accessory, like their extra stuff, right? But it wouldn't be visible to the streetscape, it wouldn't be there, but I think. Including the warehousing now, if the whole residential development falls apart. It would allow them to put in an Amazon style warehouse if we allow it this year. It's not one of our preferences as a council, so, but. They will be able to manage like individual storage for the residents to store their stuff and the way it's being voted on today.
Okay, yeah, it'd be interesting to see a little more visual. See how you say, you could put a storage kind of con.
Well, one of the things that I've been told is that some of these large developments have these self-storage, it's a building. We're used to what we see in Point Edward, you know, the long structure. These are like, they're done up to look like part of the residential area. It's like, you know, like a Bell building where they build and they hide them into residential areas, but they make them look like a house.
Yeah, but I think the concern is. Areas, they don't wanna have semi truck pulling into.
No, this is for the storage,
Right.
not the buildings. Yeah, this is like the storage building. So if you got your high rise and then you've got your accessory building, it's done up to not look like it's done up to
Yeah, no.
conform into the area. Thank you. Yes,
Truck traffic. Living in Point Edward, I grew up on St. Clair Street. There's truck traffic 24/7 going over the bridge. I came back from just down the road. And coming down the 402, the trucks were backed up to probably past Colburn Road. So this is something that we deal with all the time. I don't see it as being more truck traffic. As far as warehouses goes, we already have a warehouse in the village of Point Edward that operates on Light Street and Merritt. And they have stuff that's there. I think what we're talking about here is something that's not necessarily gonna look like a warehouse. And I've seen it in other cities where even storage facilities. I didn't know it was a storage facility as I drove by because it looked really cool. And you don't see it as maybe that dingy old warehouse that looks terrible. So I think we're maybe looking at it from a little more of a critical stance. And until we get visuals. I don't know if there's something that we want to completely reject.
thank you. That's right. Any other questions before we close the public portion? Okay. Is council prepared to make a motion tonight? Anybody?
I'll make a motion that bylaw number 3 of 2025, in the bylaw to adopt the official plan amendment number 5, be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed this 15th day of January 2025. So that's as discussed. There's no changes.
It does.
So if I made the motion that's made then is to permit to pass the bylaw as circulated, just so council is clear, which would not include retail housing and separate mini storage. It would still allow mini storage as an accessory use, would not permit it and was a standalone. So if this motion were passed, that's what, so everyone understands what's being discussed, that's what would be in place.
And to clarify. All the commercial retail will be allowed, they would be allowed to warehouse their stuff in their stores, but there would be no standalone. Amazon style, or would this exclude Costco as well? It's not that I. Costco.
Through the chair, we really have one most right the definition, because we want to answer that, we don't have an answer.
Been made, seconded, pass the bylaw as it stands today. If council wishes to discuss, I mean, you should open up, sorry. But now when you're open for discussion or open it.
Yeah.
think that. Not allowing them, to right, without. They could possibly not. And more and more. Walk when it's not really where. Everything we need, right, where you are, but you have to think creatively to make that happen. And I think that we are thinking about this warehouse and storage units as we would typically see on these big old buildings with massive, just floor space full of boxes that were, rows of storage units, these large doors at night. I think that, you know, that's not something that we want, but I would like to see creativity that gets put into how they can make it happen and then serve the community.
Okay, guys.
I just wanted to clarify that, you know, I support what staff presented with the caveat that I understood that when Taylor and the planner were talking, that they were committed to making this work, whether it means accessory building, time storage it, or there's a will to resolve it and not go to standalone stuff, so that was.
But it's not there. To have those agreements, you know, like at the zoning bylaw level, unless we make nothing.
The way the bylaw is presented tonight does not permit standalone self-storage, right? And it does not permit retail warehouse. If the motion is passed, made now, it's passed, those two uses are everything. If I may, if council wishes to include those, you don't have, like, Mr. Fokins has talked a couple times about putting some regulations in place. So if it is something you wish to consider, you can put this back to staff and ask them to report back at a future meeting with what those details may look like. So there's a bit of a fear of, you know, your typical mini storage facility. And I'm sensing a desire not to have that. There is a sense that you may want to consider some form of retail warehousing, but you want to have controls and regulations in it. If you just include those two uses, right, add them in as uses tonight, it's wide open, and we have a bit of control, but it's much more. It's better to put those regulations in place now. So if you wanted to include those two uses, the idea would be to refer it back to staff and see if our planners can work with the applicant's planners to come up with a compromise that everyone can work with. And ultimately, that may not work. You know, they can talk amongst themselves, and they may come up with some regulations that both feel they can work with, and that our planner can recommend to us, or they may not, and our planner may stay where he's at today. But it gives you an opportunity to provide direction back to staff to investigate what's possible regulations might look like.
That's
So the motion's on the floor, and you need to deal with it as
Okay.
a
So,
normal.
okay, so we have to vote on the motion, all in favor?
But this clarification, not maybe misunderstanding this. If we approve it right now, they could put self-storage into any of the buildings they build as a service to residents in those buildings. So they could have the ground floor at the back could be 40 units.
Or an accessory.
Or they could also design a building, yeah, off to the side, it's pretty and all that stuff, it doesn't look like a storage unit, but and it would be strictly for the residents of that complex, so I couldn't go rent a storage unit in there because we're not allowing standalone self-storage. And then the retail commercial, the retail warehousing, we're allowing all options of commercial in the retail area. And so there's all kinds of different stores. It could be a warehouse style store, could be in there, like I said, Costco, for lack of a better word, could be in that area, but it would not allow a warehouse that does not allow people to come in and shop, it would be like strictly storage warehouse. Am I understanding that right?
Get through the chair, there's a bit there. Taylor did define or look at the definition for retail warehouse, which does allow people actually coming to the store and purchasing goods at that retail warehouse. It wouldn't be just a warehouse building where these goods are stored. There would be a certain degree, it would allow people to visit. There was comments there about potentially coming back at a later council date to better define exactly where is the line between a retail between a retail store and a retail warehouse. We could have discussions with Lincoln Preamble, and Taylor to maybe there's a floor area or something. There's different things that we can take a look at. Maybe it's a definition of the official plan. There's different things we could look at and try to come to some sort of compromise on what we'd be okay with. If council wants to go that route, that's definitely an option.
So there's a motion on the floor. All in favor? Recorded vote. Council Burgess? In favor. Deputy Mayor Grimes?
In favor.
In favor?
And I'm against. So it passes. I don't understand. That definition. So I'm going to turn the meeting back over to our planner, Jordan, and he will review the next steps and possible appeal rights.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, just for everybody here in the audience today, it was approved was the application as submitted without the retail warehousing and without the self-storage. The next steps in this process is for Jared and myself to put together what's called a record. That would be sent to the county of Lambton, who is the approval authority for amendments to the village efficient plan. They would then circulate a notice of approval to anybody who asked for a copy of the decision and all other parties as required by the planning act. That would be then subject to a certain amount of days, 20-day appeal period, where anybody here today or the applicant would have the ability to appeal this decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If there are no appeals, the next step, as we said in the presentation, would be there'd be another public meeting for a zoning bylaw amendments, and that would come at a later date, once more details of the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that tonight. And thanks everyone for coming. Moving on. Bylaws.
I'll move the bylaw number 4 of 2025 being a bylaw to confirm the resolutions of council up to and including January 15th, 2025, be read first, second, third time.
I don't know.
Oh, sorry, never mind. Okay, finally passes 15th day of January 2025.
That's not doing it. All in favor? Motion to adjourn. Montague. Council Montague, all in favor?